Last week we were talking about garden birds. This week we're talking about hedgehogs. Next week it'll be Helen talking about bats. And yeah, so hedgehog is quite a good time of year. In a way, it's quite a good time of year to talk about hedgehogs because it's actually World Hedgehog Day next Tuesday. I guess because everybody needs to start getting their gardens ready for when our hedgehogs come out of hibernation. So it's a good time to start learning about them and what their needs are in your garden. So I'm going to talk a bit about hedgehogs, like a few facts and figures, where they live, their population status, why they're threatened, and then how we can help them. So here we go. Here's our hedgehog on the left here, the Western European hedgehog. It's found across Europe. You can see on the map there, the green area is where our hedgehog is found. There are actually 14 to 17 different species of hedgehog in the world. That number changes depending on which taxonomist you talk to and how they split the species. And I've put 3 here to just show the variety of different types of hedgehog that we do get. So we've got the Algerian, the Ethiopian, and the long-eared hedgehogs there on the right. But yeah, just one species in the UK and really easy to identify. It's our only spiny mammal. Most people would be able to identify a hedgehog, I think, if they saw one. They actually sit in their own family group. So their closest relatives are the shrews and the moles. But they're quite separate from the rest of our wildlife. And they can live up to, in captivity, they can live up to 10 years. But in the wild, they normally, on average, will be about 3 years old. And they have around 4,000 to 6,000 spines each on their body. And those spines are made of keratin, so the same thing as our hair and our fingernails. So that, yeah, modified hairs made into spines. A little bit about kind of cultural significance. So hedgehogs don't come up that much in folklore, so in stories, but they do pop up a lot in illustrations and other things. So here on the left, we've got a little figurine from Egypt. So in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, they've found a lot of amulets and little figurines of hedgehogs because they're two hedgehog species. When there isn't very much food around, they'll dig down into the ground and they'll hide away until food becomes more abundant, when they'll come out and they'll feed up again. And so people saw this happening, these hedgehogs coming up from the ground, and they associated them with rebirth. So they thought they were kind of rising from the dead. And for that reason, they put them into they put little figurines into tombs, and they wore these amulets because they were because they associated them with rebirth. In Europe, you can find them in medieval illustrations. And mostly they will be in the illustrations, they'll be stealing fruit, mostly apples or mushrooms and grapes. And people thought that the hedgehog would go along and find the fruit and roll itself onto the fruit, and the fruit would get stuck to the spines, and then the hedgehog would walk away to its little secret lair and gather the fruit up and gobble it all up. Obviously, we know that doesn't happen now, and that was just like a myth. But actually, people really believed it, and they also thought that hedgehogs would come out at night and drink milk from cows and also eat chicken eggs. And these things are not true either. I mean, a hedgehog might go for a chicken egg if it was broken, but they wouldn't be able to get into the shell because it's too hard and too strong, a chicken egg. So not true either. But all of these beliefs led to the Vermin Act, which in the 1600s basically put a bounty on hedgehog heads. So if people found a hedgehog and they killed it and they brought it in, they would be given some money. So that was by the English Parliament and also the church. So between 1600 and 1800, I think it was 500,000 hedgehogs were killed because of this Vermin Act. So that's like that, that's a big number to be taken out of the population like that. And other countries as well. There's been kind of lots of myths and things around hedgehogs. So in Mongolia, hedgehogs were thought to be kind of really mistrustful creatures because they kind of shuffle around and put their heads down, and they were thought to be very untrustworthy. But at the same time, so they kind of thought they were a bit like bad luck. But at the same time, they would hang up the skins of hedgehogs on their doors to ward off bad things. So they're a bit of a protector as well. So all of those things are quite like bad, but eventually the hedgehog has kind of made its way into the hearts of everybody. And that's partly down to the tale of Mrs. Tiggywinkle. So Beatrix Potter wrote this children's book, and it basically changed the way that people started to think about hedgehogs, and people thought, started to think, oh, they're quite a lovely creature. And now, hedgehogs are often on the top of the list of Britain's favourite creatures, and we all try to look after them. And it's all really thanks to Beatrix Potter. Okay, so right, moving back on to the facts and figures. So talking a bit about their diet. So their diet changes throughout the year depending on what is available. In the spring, they will be more reliant on things like leather jackets. But if we look at this graph, you can see in general, mostly they're eating beetles, earwigs, caterpillars, millipedes, worms. The kind of what the proportions change depending on the study that you look at, and most studies work it out by looking at the stomach contents of dead hedgehogs. And you'll see that slugs don't actually appear on there. And we're always talking about how hedgehogs eat slugs, but other studies do include slugs in their diet. And to be fair, like if you've got the choice between a slug and like a nice crunchy beetle, like I'd probably go for the beetle. So who knows? It's interesting looking at the differences actually in the studies. But everyone agrees, yeah, beetles is kind of their main food source. Oh, and the other thing to say is that they are opportunists, so they will also go for things like bird eggs, not chicken eggs, but like smaller bird eggs, especially if they're kind of broken on the ground. And it has even been seen hedgehogs eating snakes, like small baby snakes. So they'll kind of go for lots of different things. Yeah, it's very varied diet. Onto their behaviour. We probably all know that they're nocturnal, and hedgehogs come out at night. They're solitary, so yeah, they don't hang out together, but they're non-territorial, so they won't be fighting over a territory. They won't hold a territory, although they might fight over mates and food. So if, for example, you put some food out and there's especially lots of big male hedgehogs, they might have a bit of a scrap over that food. A lot of people don't realize they actually have really long legs. So you can see here one running. They can run up to 7 kilometers an hour, which is pretty speedy. They can also climb and they can swim. Breeding starts at 2 years old, and it starts in May with quite noisy courtship. So a male will find a female and he'll circle her and make a lot of kind of grunting, snuffling noises. And all of that can attract other males, other rival males who might come in and kind of, fight off the first one. There could be some headbutting and some chasing. And eventually the hoglets are born in June, and litter size is about 4 to 5 hoglets per litter. although around 2/3 of those are unlikely to survive their first year. So that's quite a high proportion of the hoglets aren't going to make it, sadly. But hopefully they'll leave the nest when they're 3 to 4 weeks old with the female mother, and then they'll become independent when they're 5 to 6 weeks old. And you can see there the diagram is quite nicely shows their life cycle throughout the year. So that's from Hedgehog Street website, that diagram. And you can see that the breeding season does actually extend up to kind of the end of September, potentially even. But those like later summer, autumn young are the second brood. So sometimes, or a lot of the time, the female will try and attempt a second brood. But experts say it really is quite unlikely that those young will survive, because they don't have time to build up their fat stores before going into hibernation. So when you see a little small hedgehog out in your garden in autumn, it's probably from that second brood, and they probably need a bit of help. So there's a slide at the end. I'll explain what to do if you do find an autumn orphan, is what they call them. So hibernation, I've put there hibernation occurs from October to March, but that varies a lot. So depending on the weather, if it's a very cold year, they'll go into hibernation a bit earlier. But if it's very warm, like it was this year, it was pretty warm. I still had a hedgehog in my garden in November, and that's fine. Males will go into hibernation a bit earlier. So like a big male that's all nicely plumped up for the winter could potentially even go into hibernation in September if it's cold, whereas a female will go in a bit later because she needs a bit of time to build up her fat stores after having her young. And when they do go into hibernation, they drop their body temperature, so it's about the same as the surrounding air, and their metabolic rate really drops. So they can't do anything, all their normal activity ceases, and they close down for the winter. That hibernation, though, is not necessarily solid hibernation throughout the whole winter. They might wake up, especially if it's quite mild, they might wake up, they might have a bit of a feed, they might even move nests. It's been shown that some hedgehogs swap nests, but ideally that wouldn't happen very often. So if it's a very mild winter and they're waking up a lot, it's not very good, because it's much more difficult for them to find prey in the winter compared to the summer. So ideally they're not going to be waking up a lot. So if the weather is nice and cold and crisp, that's going to be better for our hedgehogs. There are 3 different types of nest. So there's the hibernation nest, which we'll talk about in a minute, but there's actually also 2 other types. So we've got a day nest, which is when the hedgehogs are in their active phase, so in the spring and summer and early autumn. They come out at night, but in the daytime, they're going to be bedding down, hiding away. So day nests, it could be anything, just like a loose pile of leaves or even long grass under some brambles. It's not going to be anything particularly fancy. Maternity nests are bigger and more structured, because they need to provide protection for those young for that first 3 to 4 weeks when they're in the nest. And then hibernation nests are the big, really structured ones, because they need to be really, really well insulated for the winter. So they can be up to 60 centimeters wide, and they take about between 1 and 4 days for the hedgehog to build. And they'll be in somewhere sheltered. So under brambles is like the most popular place, but it could be under your shed or kind of next to a sheltered wall. And then the hedgehogs are going to find lots of leaves and create this big nest. And it's actually, there was a study by Pat Morris in London, and he showed that inside the hedgehog hibernation nest, the temperature doesn't change that much, because it's so well insulated. So he showed that the nest stayed between 1 and 5 degrees Celsius, even when the ambient temperature, so the temperature outside of the nest, ranged from -8 to 10 degrees Celsius. So it's like, it's, you know, it's working really, really well, and it's keeping that hedgehog nice and cozy. So their habitat, so as I mentioned before, they need brambles. Brambles are brilliant for hedgehogs. So brambles and hedgerows are going to be really good. They also need long grass and short grass for foraging, and also that long grass is nice for their active phase day nests. They're going to be after leaf litter for their hibernation nests. And so, you know, urban areas are actually really good for hedgehogs because they provide all of these things. The only thing with urban areas is sometimes everything is quite closed off. So you need the hedgehog to be able to walk through. You need your gardens to be connected so that they can get to all of those different habitats and find the food that they need. And so we've got here limiting factors to presence. So the limiting factors, so where hedgehogs might not be found, it might be because there's not enough hibernation or nest options. They might not have the right size leaves. So hedgehogs are quite picky. They want quite nice medium-sized leaves. So willow leaves are too small for their nests, and sycamore leaves are too big. So we need some nice native medium-sized leaves for them. And they also need that structure for their nest, so a building or, like, you know, an old shed, or all those brambles and hedgerows. And we did once think that hedgehogs would only kind of roam about the size of a normal garden, but there was a study where basically they tracked hedgehogs throughout the landscape. They put little radio trackers on them, and they realized that hedgehogs were traveling a lot further than we ever thought before. So you can see here, male 106, he was on a golf course, an 18-hole golf course, which is 40 hectares large. And he roamed the whole thing and went into gardens to get supplementary food. And they realized that hedgehogs traveled around, on average, 2 kilometers a night, and the males can travel up to 3 kilometers in the breeding season when they're looking for females. So this really kind of changed how we thought about hedgehogs, and also what we thought we needed to do to help them. It's really difficult to estimate the numbers of hedgehogs because they're nocturnal and they're solitary. But if you did want to find out a bit about their population status, a good place to look is the State of Britain's Hedgehogs. So the latest one was in 2018. It's written by the British Hedgehog Preservation Society and also the People's Trust for Endangered Species. And in that, they state that since the year 2000, rural populations have declined by at least a half, and urban populations have declined by up to a third. So, you know, that's really significant. The last kind of, so in 1995, there was a study that most people kind of think that was the first kind of reliable study for population. And they put the population then at 1.5 million. But as you can see, that's really dropped since then. And those, so that study was done by garden surveys. So it's always really, really good to send in your sightings if you do have a hedgehog in your garden, because it all feeds into that population estimate. And they also used roadkill surveys, especially in rural areas. So yeah, always send in your hedgehog sightings to Hedgehog Street. They've got a big hedgehog map, and you can put your postcode in and say if you've seen a live hedgehog or a dead hedgehog, or in your garden or nearby. It's really important. So what is causing this decline? So habitat fragmentation is the big one. So habitats not being connected up. So as we know now, hedgerows are really important for hedgehogs. If hedgerows are removed, then the hedgehogs don't have that habitat and they don't have the ability to pass through the landscape. So we need all those really nice corridors for them. Agricultural intensification, so soil invertebrates, there's a lot less soil invertebrates now due to agricultural intensification, and larger field sizes again means that they're losing their habitat. Yeah, loss of hedgerows and prey availability, so yeah, the hedgerows are going to be providing all of that. And I mentioned last week, and another reminder, our Action for Insects campaign. So you can help in your area, help provide some prey for hedgehogs if you help insects in your garden or your community space. So if you go onto our website, look up Action for Insects on Devon Wildlife Trust website, you can get a really good guide, community guide, and an individual guide for your garden about how to encourage insects, which will then feed our lovely hedgehogs, as well as our garden birds and, you know, all our other wildlife that depends on them. Other causes of decline, so we've got roadkill. So around 100,000 hedgehogs are killed on the road each year, which is a really significant number when you put that against the overall population. Impermeable boundaries, so things like fences, walls, also if people pave over their front gardens, that kind of thing, is going to make it really difficult for hedgehogs to move through the landscape and get to all that prey and habitat that they need and nesting opportunities. Strimming and flailing. So hedgehogs don't have a flight response. So if they're scared, they will roll up into a ball, like we all probably know, and they don't run away at all. So if a strimmer comes along, they're going to roll into a ball, and that's going to be the end of our little hedgehog. So if you are strimming or flailing or cutting your garden with a hedge strimmer, do just have a little check first to make sure there aren't any hedgehogs. And we're addicted to tidy, like we really like short grass and nice tidy edges, but if you can leave a little bit of wild area in your garden, then that's really going to help. Oh, and I've put badgers there. Sometimes people are a bit worried about badgers and hedgehogs. Badgers are they're the only predator of hedgehogs in the UK, and they're the only thing that are actually strong enough to unroll the hedgehog to be able to eat them. But the effect of badgers predating on hedgehogs is not significant. The decline of hedgehogs is the same depending on whether the population of badgers is high or not. So it really is loss of habitat fragmentation and loss of prey that is causing the decline of hedgehogs, not badger predation. So we would never as a wildlife trust promote killing of one native species to protect another. So how can you help in your garden? So the first thing is hedgehog safety. So you can go out into your garden or your community space and do a little bit of a check about how safe it is for hedgehogs. Drains and ditches are not, they can be quite dangerous because a hedgehog can get trapped in them. So either cover them over or put a little ramp. Netting is quite dangerous for hedgehogs. Make sure if you do have to use it that it's tight and that you check it often. Ideally don't use it at all, but sometimes you've got to. And ponds are brilliant for wildlife, but if they've got a steep slope, then that could be a real hazard because the hedgehog will fall in, and they're really good swimmers, so they'll swim around for a bit, but eventually they'll tire, and if they can't get out, then they can drown. So make sure that you've either got a nice sloping side, which is ideal because then wildlife can get in and have a drink, or you put a ramp up so that if a hedgehog does fall in, they've got a way out. It's gone bonfire night now, but for next year, or if you're doing a bonfire another time of year, Make sure that you don't make your bonfire until the moment you're going to light it, ideally. If you do have to make the bonfire pile beforehand, then ideally move it before you light it, or give it a really, really good shake, scare away anything that's in there. And even if you do that, make sure you just light it from one side, so that if there is a hedgehog in there, it can hopefully work its way out the other end. And the other thing you can do is fence it off as well until you're ready to light. Slug control is something we used to talk about, so stopping the use of slug pellets in your garden. But the great news is that actually slug pellets with betaaldehyde in have actually been banned. So it was only a few months ago that they did this, and they've been banned from the end of March 2022, but the sale of them has actually been banned from the end of March 2021. But you've got a year's grace to use up your pellets. We would not recommend you do that. We would recommend you dispose of them at a disposal site, not in your normal bin. So that's really great, because slug pellets are terrible for hedgehogs. The slugs eat the pellets, the hedgehogs eat the slugs, and that can have a real build-up in the hedgehog's body. So yeah, we're really, really pleased about that news. And what can you do instead? So you know, without the use of pellets, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes if you're growing your veg. The best thing you can do is to encourage predators into your garden, so you've got a much more natural cycle. If you put out pellets, then the slugs all die, and you don't have that predator presence to eat the slugs. So you would always be reliant on the pellet. Whereas if you have a more natural system where you've got birds and frogs and slow worms and things like this coming in to eat the slugs and other pests, then you're in a much better position. Other things you can do are you can go out with a torch at night and just pick up the slugs. Make sure you think about when you're watering your plants. So don't water your plants at night, because slugs love moisture, so they're going to be a lot more, they're going to come out a lot more if you water at night. You can also use things like copper rings, copper tape, beer traps. If you use a beer trap, make sure that the pot is slightly above ground level to stop caterpillars or beetles falling in. And you might also want to put a lid on the top, like a bit raised up, to stop anything from falling in that shouldn't be in there. And I've shown here, there was a little experiment I found online where somebody found the best thing to use to stop snails is brambles. So if you did have something, a particular plant that you really wanted to protect, you could have a go at cutting up some brambles and putting it around the vulnerable plant, and that might help a little bit too. So yeah, lots of ideas, alternative ideas to pellets there. The best thing you can do in your garden to help hedgehogs is to let them in. So give them a door and make a hole in your fence. It only needs to be 13 by 13 centimeters. So it's quite small, not much else is going to be able to fit through there. You can make a hole through, or you could, even if you've got a wall, or if you don't want to put a hole in your fence, you can dig a tunnel underneath. That's what we've got in our garden. And the hedgehogs will go under no problem. One thing just to make sure is that you don't put the hole on a wall that's facing a road. So because you don't want the hedgehog to go out and then be on the road. So make sure it's garden to garden, and you talk to your neighbour, or garden to path, or park, or whatever you've got around you. Just think about the route of the hedgehog. You can also put food out. So probably people know milk and bread are not good for hedgehogs, so don't put those out. No milk, no bread, because milk can make the hedgehogs' tummies a bit bad. and bread, yeah, is going to fill them up, but it's got no nutritional value. We used to say to put mealworms out, but we say not to do that anymore because we now know that mealworms can cause metabolic bone disease. So steer clear of those as well. What you want to be putting out is meaty cat or dog food out of a tin, or cat or dog biscuits. So if you put the biscuits out, it's really important, and it's important anyway, to also put water out, because the hedgehogs need a nice drink. So yes, especially if you're putting biscuits out, make sure you've got that water as well. And you can see here we've got on the bottom right, there's a little feeding station. So if you don't want the local cats to come and eat all your hedgehog food, then you can make a little feeding station. That's just a plastic box. Somebody's cut a hole in one end, put the food in the other end, and put a lid and a brick on the top so that nothing can get in the top. And it keeps it dry if it rains as well. So it's quite a good thing to do. Yeah, if you kind of want to keep that food, especially for your hedgehogs. You can actually buy special hedgehog food as well. It's quite expensive, but you can get it from pet food stores, which is another option. But the best thing you can do, so because all of that food that I've just spoken about is only ever going to be supplementary. The hedgehogs won't become reliant on them or anything. The best thing you can do is make your garden so that it's good for natural food for the hedgehogs. So make a log pile, really good for beetles, which we know hedgehogs love. Leave your herbaceous perennials, so your plants that are going to have these nice tubes for insects to hide in over the winter. Leave them over the winter, don't clear them back. That's going to encourage lots of insects. If you can have a nettle patch in a nice sunny spot, then that is going to be so good for so many butterflies. They're going to lay their eggs on the nettles, which then obviously lead to caterpillars, and caterpillars, again, really high on that list of hedgehog prey. And a pond is, yeah, one of the best things you can do for wildlife in your garden. Just make sure they've got that sloping side, and that's going to provide a lot of insect prey, but also water for the hedgehogs to drink. And yeah, we've got a leaf pile in the autumn for them to make their nest. And we've got a kind of compost, like a log pile with a hole in it there, so good for insects, and also maybe a hibernation spot there too. And yeah, the wider landscape, we're always working as a trust with landowners to try and join up landscapes, put in hedgerows and wildflower rich meadows. Also things like cattle grids can be a real big hazard for hedgehogs, so putting in ramps for cattle grids is another good one. And how do you know if you've got a hedgehog in your garden? So you can have a look for their poo. You can see a little picture of some hedgehog poo there. It's black and it's shiny because of all of those beetle cases that they eat. You could also maybe make a tracking footprint tunnel. So you can buy these, or there are some instructions online. And basically it's a piece of paper in a tunnel, and there's food at one end and ink at the other, and the hedgehog walks across the ink pad and then across the paper to get the food, and it leaves its little tracks, and you can identify the tracks later. Or you can get a wildlife camera. I don't have a wildlife camera, but I've got a security camera which we put behind our shed. So this is our little hedgehog from November. So you can see behind our shed is not tidy. It's got lots of leaves and brambles and things. But we got a hedgehog through there most nights on its little way round the gardens around here. And it's so exciting when you get a hedgehog, I have to say. You can also sign up to be a Hedgehog Champion with Devon Wildlife Trust. So when you sign up, you get a pack, and you get some posters to put up in your local community, although it's a bit difficult at the moment, but eventually. You get some leaflets to put through your neighbour's door, which show how they can help wildlife and how they can help hedgehogs. And you get some little postcards that show the size of the hole that you need in your fence. The packs might just take a little bit longer to get to you at the moment, just because we don't have very many people in the office. But yeah, have a look. You just put in Hedgehog Champions, Devon Wildlife Trust into a search engine, it should come up. And oh, I did say I'd talk a little bit about if you find a hedgehog. This is more likely to happen slightly earlier in the year, in autumn. So, because often people do ask. So there's no specific weight that guarantees survival throughout the winter, but hedgehogs trying to hibernate when they're less than 450 grams are not likely to survive. So if you find a hedgehog that's less than 450 grams between October and February, then you're going to need to rescue that hedgehog. So what you would do is get some gardening gloves on, some big thick gloves, pick up your hedgehog really gently, put it in a cardboard box with probably like a fleece and like maybe a hot water bottle, warm hot water bottle. Just make sure that the hedgehog can get on and off that hot water bottle as and when needed. Bit of food and water. And then you're going to want to ring your local hedgehog rehabilitator. If you can't find that telephone number, you can phone the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, and they'll give you some information about what to do, and they'll put you in touch with your local hedgehog hospital, and the telephone number's there. And it says there, rescue at 500 grams or more is not necessary based on weight alone. The only thing is, if you saw a hedgehog that was a bit bigger, but it was out in the daytime, like looking confused, dizzy, disorientated, then that hedgehog might need some help too. The only exception is occasionally, so in the summer, like you might find a female out in the day, just getting a break from the nest, getting a bit of extra food. So she'll be fine. If the hedgehog looks like it's kind of, on its way to do something and looks all right in the day, it probably is okay. But it's if it's looking a bit dizzy and disorientated, or if it's sunbathing, that's when you've got a problem. So hopefully that helps a little bit if you do find one. And yeah, that's it.